Guten gardening, everybody. Well, I hope your indoor growing season is off to a fantastic start. You know, the last couple of days here in Zone 5, Wisconsin, the temperatures outside reached somewhere in the 40s, and it just seemed almost impossible for mid-December. And then today we had 15, 20 mile an hour winds, temperatures below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and we were definitely reminded that the weather outside isn't going to be warm for quite some time here in Wisconsin. Well, in our indoor growing space here, I am sitting beside one of our GreenStalk vertical gardens. We have a couple of them that we're growing in indoors this season, and I thought it made sense to do a video where we talked about how we water the GreenStalk gardens. And this is a question that comes up fairly frequently, and I just want to show you what we typically do indoors, because the reality is that even though we've been growing in our GreenStalk system indoors for the last couple of years, I think GreenStalk will even admit that they're not technically set up as indoor planters. And so because of the way these are watered, you have to get a little bit creative. So there are a couple of things that we do, a couple of different options I would say that we do in order to keep these going. But before I talk about that, I do want to point something out. I said that this is our third year of growing in our GreenStalks indoors. So we do have some experience with this. The first year we grew indoors in our GreenStalk system, we grew sweet potatoes. We actually took some of the vines from our sweet potato crop as we harvested it in the fall, and we overwintered them and grew them into more sweet potatoes. Now, we didn't get a massive harvest, but it was a lot of fun to experiment around with that. Last year, which would be our second season growing indoors, we grew a whole bunch of different vegetables in here. So we grew some beets, we grew some radishes, a whole bunch of radishes actually. And I ended up taking that indoor system outdoors and finishing them off in the spring. And I did a YouTube short about this, but we got some of the biggest beets that we've ever grown in a GreenStalk for sure. It was really cool to see. So here we are in our third year, and I've got a couple of different varieties of vegetables growing in here. And if you looked at our first indoor garden tour, you saw some of those vegetables maybe about a week or so ago. Some of our radishes, which are getting a little bit bigger now, some of our turnips in here as well. We've got potatoes in the bottom. We've got a lot going on in here. So if you want to see what exactly we have growing in here, you should check out that earlier video. Now, the purpose of today's video is to talk watering. So traditionally, for a GreenStalk system, you water from the top, and once you water at the top, it floats down. This is one of the big benefits of the GreenStalk system. It floats down through holes to each tier. And basically, you continue watering at the top until water comes out of the bottom, and you should have a pretty evenly watered setup. Well, if I do that indoors, then in all likelihood, I'm going to have a problem. I'm going to have water running everywhere. So there are a couple of things that you have to decide. The first thing is, do I want to still water from the top? Because that's still something possible with our setup the way we do the watering. It's definitely something possible. You can still water from the top. The other option is, and it takes a little bit more work, but you can go to watering in each of the pockets. And if you want to water a little bit less, and that way you're filling each tier or watering each tier to the point where you've got enough water in there, you're still going to basically have the same issue though, which is that you're going to have any excess moisture trickling down the whole way to the bottom and coming out the bottom. So it's important to have something down here to catch, and that's where we get to the main addition that helps us to be able to water these indoors, and that is a spinner or a mover. Now, GreenStalk sells a couple of different bases for these planters, but the base has the benefit, in one case you could have wheels on it, so you can actually move your GreenStalk very easily, but it essentially adds a catch tray to the bottom of the setup with a bit of tubing that comes out the side. So what happens, you water either from the top or in each of the pockets, however you want to do it, and the excess water will eventually come out that tubing. Okay, so first of all, now we're isolating our water to one stream, so that's a little bit easier to catch. But here's what you're going to notice, that base, if you use the one, let's just say the one that we have with the wheels on, you only have, if you're going to get the water to flow out, you only have about an inch height from the tube itself, from the end of the tube to the ground. And so what does that mean? That means that I have to find some tray that is about an inch tall, and I'm going to set that underneath, and I'm probably going to have to catch the water fairly frequently. So here's where you get into really good practice of not overwatering. You water to a point where you get some water coming out the bottom, but not a massive flow. If I pour 4, 5, 6 gallons of water here at the top, I'm going to have a hard time. So it's important growing in these indoors, certainly not to overwater. So if you're going to use this system, then something like this, a tray with no holes in it, something that you would use as a saucer for a pot, something like this, to set it directly underneath the tubing and then let the water come out. Now, if you overwater to a point that this fills up, you can take it and pour it right back into the top or right back into one of the pockets. But there's still going to be some dripping coming out the bottom. So again, the goal is don't overwater so you don't have a massive problem. All right, so this is one solution that gets us about an inch off the ground, and it still enables us to rotate our tower. Now, the second solution to this is similar to the first in that we're using the same base, but the difference is we're going to take off the wheels. So taking off the wheels subtracts about 2 inches of height, 1.5 to 2 inches of height. So what does that do for us? Well, in order for this to work with the wheels off, we need to jack it up a little bit. And what we do with that is we create a tier using bricks. Now, you can create one layer or you can go double layer high, and then the result is you're going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of about 4 or 5 inches of height from the tubing off of the ground. And then you can set a bigger container inside and use that bigger container to go ahead and catch water, so you don't have to be as careful when you're watering your GreenStalk. Now, what's the downside to this? The downside is you really have to have good, consistent light around your plant, because you're not going to be able to move it as easily because you've gotten rid of the wheels. Secondly, you're going to have enough space that you can get around and harvest whatever you're growing, or maybe you're growing something that only has to be harvested once, not a cut and come again green, for example. So you're not going to get that rotation, so you need consistent light the whole way around, but it does make that watering process a whole lot easier. Now, that's the type of base we have. If we had a spinner base, meaning it didn't need wheels and we could just turn it anyway, well, that would make the process even better. So I would recommend, if you're growing indoors, if you want to be successful growing with your GreenStalks indoors, you definitely need a base for them, or else you're going to have a problem with watering everywhere. And you can be selective about the type of base that you use, but really it comes back to that idea of not overwatering, but being consistent. If your soil dries out and you have a soil that's high, let's say in peat moss, for example, you know that peat moss is somewhat hydrophobic. And I know not everybody uses peat moss, but what that means is if you're pouring water in, you're watering and your soil doesn't actually hold on to it because you let it get too dry. Again, if it's a hydrophobic soil, then that water is going to run through and you're not actually going to get the amount of water in each tier that you really want. So if you are careful, you keep things damp, and then you add in more water as needed, then you're not going to have that problem either, and you should get some pretty consistent watering. Well, that was a lot of talking, but I hope that all made sense. We try to encourage people to try new things, and adding a GreenStalk, adding a vertical setup indoors can really expand an indoor space, but you don't want something that's going to create a mess. Now, just because these systems aren't necessarily or inherently set up for indoor gardening yet, doesn't mean there might not be some adjustments in the future or some additional improvements for indoor gardening from GreenStalk themselves. We found that company to be fantastic to work with, and we found them to have quite a bit of ingenuity. And so I think if enough people start growing indoors with these GreenStalks, you'll see some changes or adjustments even to help with that indoor process. But for now, that's what we do, and it's worked well for us now going into year 3. All right, well, we hope you enjoyed today's video, found it useful, or got something from it that you can use. We hope you're encouraged for your indoor growing season. And if you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to give us a like. Leave us a comment. Remember to share and subscribe. And most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.